Well, hello, everybody. Wanted to welcome everybody that's just joining us for the Synoptic Real-Time Communications in the Modern Workforce Workplace. We're going to give everybody a few minutes here before we get into introductions and the overall presentation. But again, appreciate those that are joining us right now. And we'll be starting shortly. We'll give everybody maybe just a minute before we get started. But again, thanks everybody for joining. And again, for those of us, those that are just joining us, we're just giving it maybe one more minute as we prepare and let people jump on, but we're going to want to get started here shortly. And just another 30 seconds here. What we really need is the countdown to start the webinar for the start of the webinar. All right, folks. Well, again, I want to thank everybody for joining us. We're going to get started here. This is the webinar for real-time communications in the modern workplace. And again, I want to thank everybody for joining us. And with that said, we're just going to real quickly go over what we're going to cover today. Really the impact of COVID-19 and how it's changing business as we know it. The challenge in driving real-time communications in an enterprise. What does that mean? What does that entail today? And then again, kind of how Synoptic's real-time communications offering can be a game changer. And what we're seeing, we've got some real live stories today that we're going to make some introductions here. But how some organizations are failing in making that change and how Synoptic can help. So with that, I want to get into some introductions. Myself, as a technology evangelist, I've spent my entire career in technology, and I've seen the shifts over the last 25 years, 15 of which have been spent as a co-founder of Synoptic. It was a global IT management consulting firm headquartered here in Southern California. But one of the major shifts I've seen has been in unified communications and or real-time communications. And there's never been a greater change than what we've seen in the last years, given the COVID-19 impact. With that, I want to introduce our guests and my co-presenter, Ricardo Ordonez. Ricardo's been a leader in management and real-time communications for several years and is helping lead Synoptic's practice in real-time communications, focusing on voice, SMS, and AI and the Microsoft Teams environment. And I've personally known Ricardo as a practice leader, but also for over 10 years as he's helped other businesses start and lead and grow their businesses. Again, I want to thank Joe Mundy for joining us. Joe is the VP of Operations and Technology. He delivers services at Dynamic Healthcare, but with over 25 years of enterprise-level experience in fulfilling his critical corporate objectives and direct functional project teams leading complex infrastructure projects from conception to deployment. He's worked for organizations like NTT Data, Dell Services, and Perot Systems. Joe, again, thank you for joining us. Additionally, Chuck Sweet is the President and Chief Staff and President for Operations at Southern California University of Health Sciences. Chuck brings an extensive breadth and depth of knowledge and experience in higher education arena. With over 35 years in his career, Chuck has grown higher education institutions and organizations, managing all areas, including sales, marketing, business and product development, operations, and IT productivity. Chuck has worked in organizations such as Campus Works, North Central University, Union Bank and Trust, and the list goes on. Chuck, again, I know you're a busy guy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to do it. Thank you.
Additionally, I've also invited a few of our client advisors in Synoptic with Rights Their Own. Kent and Stefan will be joining us as part of the conversation as they work with Chuck and Joe during their transitions to real-time communications. Again, thanks everybody for joining. And with that, I'll jump right in. So just a brief overview of Synoptic. Again, Synoptic has been around for the last 20 years with over 900 plus employees. We have key practice areas, 8 of which business applications, data insights, cloud advancement, infrastructure, cybersecurity, product development, and what we're going to talk about today, workforce productivity and how real-time communications improves the workforce. Specialties with Microsoft and a number of industries. So again, brief overview there, but really want to focus in on the changes today and what's impacting the world. With COVID, we've seen 54% of respondents across the globe are suggesting that remote working culture is just been an increase, stated by McKinsey. Over 80% of employees want to work from home, at least some of the time. And over a third of those would actually take a pay cut in exchange for that type of option. Enterprise collaboration in the market is becoming a $45 billion industry by the year 2025. Bring your own devices is expected to drive more demand, especially in unified communication, even just within another year or two. And Microsoft is now 145 million users using the Microsoft Teams communications platform. And so we've just seen those impacts. We're hearing it in the marketplace. And so my guests here today will talk through that and this kind of changing landscape and marketplace. Went a little too far there. If you look at the changing marketplace and what we're seeing there, one of the things we have in the UCaaS market space, for example, all of these different providers, the RingCentrals, the Microsoft, the Bells, those are your standard providers of phone systems. And you can see that many of them are kind of stagnant and they've plateaued. But Microsoft, which is that yellow line, is continuing to peak. Even through the COVID, and especially so with their Microsoft Teams platform. And again, just mentioning the active users are in the millions and continuing to grow and scale as time goes on. With that, what I really want to do is I want to lead over here to Ricardo to just talk real quickly about real-time communications and what it means today versus what it may have meant in the past.
Sure. Thank you, Eric. And communications has really evolved. You think of communications at one point in time was, telephone calls. And at that point in time, metrics that you would be, the golden standard was, I want to know how many calls my staff made. What was the average duration of the call? How much total time were they on the phone? And the reality is, if that were a metric that we were using today, you would probably fire all of your staff. Communications has emerged into collaboration, video calls like this. It's going to be significantly more. It transcends a phone call and telephony. It's going to be about how quickly and efficiently can you pull somebody into communication, immediately start screen sharing with them, video call, pull in additional participants, route calls efficiently, route calls to the right person, more efficiently. And you need to take this holistic view of communications, and you need to be able to do that with real-time statistics and performance. And really, when you look at the charts of why Microsoft has exploded, and it really has exploded because it's emerged as the industry's best collaboration tool, right? It's this single pane of glass experience that keeps one user identity within the IT environment and creates a tremendous amount of elegance, simplification, creates clarity within the user base. It's one application, one view. And by driving your activity through that app, you start getting metrics around how long was this person presenting? How many meetings did they schedule? How many meetings did they attend? How many were ad hoc versus recurring? Right. So depending on the user and their position, communication is going to be different and unique. And, it's not a one size fits all. So you need something that's highly adaptable and can basically capture that activity. And so I think as we get through it, you'll start understanding why Teams has met this need in the market and has been adopted so ferociously.
Rico, appreciate that. And for all of you that are watching this, we're sending out a poll if you haven't seen it already. But really curious, has technology adoption in your organization accelerated because of COVID-19? Has that been a major driver? Yes, no, or was it accelerated for other reasons in your business? Again, we'd love to kind of understand that. So you'll be seeing that poll shortly as well. Please take a moment to answer those, give some good feedback. So one of the things I really want to jump into and get to my my guests here, special guests, but just real world examples of projects that have moved forward during this COVID time, the technology barriers, some of the implementation challenges, and even the cultural barriers. And so really what I want to do here is allow Joe and Chuck to speak. So with that, again, want to welcome Chuck. Thank you for joining us. Chuck, and again, this isn't scripted, just really looking for, tell us a little bit about maybe the state you were in beforehand, the technology you had, the challenges you had, and tell us just a little bit about your project, and I'm sure I'll have some more questions as you go on.
Sure. So Southern California University, relatively small university, about 1,200 head count now, full-time equivalencies, but has been in business for well over 100 years, primarily started in the chiropractic space, but a very targeted graduate level institution. As you can imagine, with that kind of history depth, very legacy system platform. So as far as the communication goes, very disjointed, not unified platforms. I was starting to make progress down the path of bringing things together, but we still had the desktop units in place, the legacy ShoreTel, MyTel sort of environment. People were doing, emails separately, walking down the hall for meetings, trying to grab people here and there when you could. Scheduling was starting to get cleaned up a little bit as far as some of the meetings such, but there was no way to unify and bring all that together. And there was no discussion about chat or immediate sort of interaction at all. So kind of just a very legacy environment with legacy buildings and structures and architectures, both in tech and in the environment.
So Chuck, tell me a little bit about some of the cultural barriers and the adoption, again, through COVID-19, maybe before COVID-19, what was the atmosphere?
So, sure. So I know I mentioned it just a little bit. Being a medical university, you have, and in higher ed's very incremental, right? It doesn't move fast. It's really challenging to drive things rapidly. So it's very, slow paced. You always had to think about training, development, communications, and those were key pieces. We were trying to start moving towards that, go online, go virtual, both in the classroom environment and in our administrative environments. Neither were happening fast enough as far as I was concerned. In some ways, COVID did us a favor. It actually shoved us over the cliff. Now, that being the fact, we had Microsoft already on campus. O365 conversion had taken place. We hadn't fully implemented, trained, again, the incremental approach to higher ed. Teams hadn't been fully rolled out. We were pushing at the edges, right? So we had to jump fast. And what we actually did was move to Zoom so rapidly because it was a rapid piece. We didn't have to do training. People were familiar with it. That being said, it was now another technology that didn't integrate with anything else, didn't align my communications, but it facilitated our course room needs for students and faculty to rapidly get into classrooms. So we did move that way. In the last 2 years, you've seen this rapid shift of Microsoft and God bless them, putting a lot of time and effort and cost and money into the team's development and the team's environment. So when we started looking at the VoIP options and bringing the telecommunications into the kind of 21st century, it was pretty easy decision because we already had the licenses in place. We had to get the technology in place and train more than anything else. Culturally, huge shift. If you think about, again, medical schools, the millennial cultures haven't quite moved through higher education yet. So we have legacy, like myself, people on campus who I may be the outlier. Most of them are used to using that desktop. They don't have a clue on didn't have a clue on how to dial through a computer, right? How to make a call, how to push a button to connect to somebody without dialing, right? It was a huge cultural shift. And I will tell you just as an early precursor to things I'm going to say later, don't neglect the over communication in the process, right? It wasn't that big of a shift, but the over communication and the realization in any environment that you probably have more than one constituency on communications with needs that may be disparate. So we have a health center and a clinic. We have admissions. We have course being taught. Different sort of constituencies need different sort of solutions. And we did fairly well with that, but we probably slipped a little bit and not quite realizing the depth of some of those constituencies because of the legacy environment. So it was all on our side. But we went through the process to clean those up and move them forward. So it was a little bit of a shock and awe when COVID hit, and now we've progressed it so fast that it's there, and the communication culture is shifting with us now, and starting to catch up to us. So we're getting there.
No, thanks. I really appreciate that, Chuck. It's a great insight. Joe, I want to get your take. Maybe talk about again your transition. What was it like before? what's it been like since? And we'll get into maybe some of the questions that I asked Chuck as well.
Sure. So our change was pushed forward by a move. I mean, so many of us get into a spot where you end up moving offices or you end up moving your operations. I work for a dynamic healthcare system, and we are a software as a service company. And we had to move. And what we didn't want to do is continue to propagate more wires and more devices. So we came from a situation where we had hardwired phones. Although they were VoIP phones, it's still another asset on the desk. And what we really wanted to do was move more toward true collaboration. So we made an interim step along the way to, this is before Teams was really ready. But during COVID-19, we decided, because the long-standing, how long was it going to take to shut down Skype? We've been hearing for years it was going away, and that's what we were using along with Zoom and other tools too for other presentations. Decided to take that jump and take a real advantage of our Microsoft licensing. There's so much in there that we're already paying for. So we made that jump and we did it during out of office. So for us, it really assisted with kind of bringing together our users in that single platform. So reduced confusion, reduced different tools that weren't working as expected, reduced the need to mindlessly forward phones and things because none of us were in the office, and it brought it all to that central pane of glass that took IT tickets out of our system, took user excuse out of our system, took confusion out.
I appreciate that. One of the things that I did see a lot during the pandemic and that shift is just the user acceptance, right? They recognized that everybody was doing their best, and there was a lot more, let's say, grace that was given to just change in general. Whereas previously we might have gotten a little bit more pushback during the pandemic and those times. Adoption to change happened a lot faster. I want to go back. I was thinking about Ricardo's conversation around what real-time communication is today. Joe, let's start with you, Joe. Tell me a little bit about your perception, your company's perception previously, before COVID, but just historically around real-time communications and how you now see that with Teams and collaboration.
I'll tell you, I've been in the industry for a long time, and we talked for years and years and years about unified communication, and somebody would come out with something and go, Cisco, somebody, here's unified communication. And it was a button that was added to Outlook, or it was, it was some kind of bolt on. Well, for us, we were separate applications. So Skype operated how Skype operated, and it was looking old. And, and when you look at adoption of that, it didn't make people excited. And we had a separate phone system, and the challenges there. And to bring them together actually, really changed productivity. It changed confidence for our users because nobody likes change. All right. Most people are afraid of change. And even when you train them and make them look easy for them, there's always something about that change that can scare them. So the nice part about, again, coming to a central app that there wasn't many places to look, right? There wasn't, oh, did you click on this? Or what screen are you on? It's, are you in Teams? And, pretty straightforward. And that took away a lot of the fear for folks. And in some cases, we did roll out a Teams phone for one of our senior executives who really needed that kind of use and confidence in a device. And in our conference rooms, we also did the Teams phones. So that helped bring together that adoption, right? We used to go into meetings with Skype, and someone had to sit there and dial the number and then dial the code, and to add the conference room, and all of it coming together made adoption something they wanted to do.
I appreciate that response. And Chuck, I'm curious, again, same question to you, looking historically, and what does real-time communications mean in the past and now with Teams?
So we were a pretty insular campus. Everything happened here prior to COVID, right? So faculty were here, staff were here, students were here. That changed literally overnight. So we now found ourselves in a position where we needed that unified communication platform because we now had to do anywhere, anytime. Literally, our students didn't have to come here anymore, except for labs, which that's a different story. But all of the didactic work could be done virtually. All of our meetings could be done virtually. But we could now have people, and we do, where we had them all in LA County previously. Now they're in Missouri, Chicago. Pick your poison. I've got people all over the world now who are whether employees and or faculty and staff and students trying to teach. So we now had to facilitate the accommodation of that environment shift. We're in some ways we're still going through that culture shift. We're trying to find the balance because we had to go so far so fast when everything shut down, and now we're trying to figure out where the balance points are. That being said, that unified platform to now keep pointing, and we're still doing some more rollouts. We still have a couple pieces to get formalized across the platform, but when we can now say just pull in teams or just, hey, we needed this person for advice on this discussion, immediately be able to pull them in if they're available and see if they're available. And or get to them on chat, through the Microsoft platforms. That whole unification piece has just been, in my mind, magic for the university. We've got some, I won't say naysayers, just people who have had a harder time picking up the culture. I wasn't as nice as Joe. I refused to put Teams phones on people's desks. We did put the octopuses, if you will, inside the conference rooms for those purposes. But other than that, I have yet to put one out there on a desk. So honestly, because it's a training issue. And once they understand and see the flows, and we've done some targeted training where we needed to, and again, different needs, different constituencies, different understandings, right? So that's kind of how we dealt with it. But we've had to face that anywhere, anytime. And that was a big hurdle for a very on-site, on-prem university.
And Chuck, I think you mentioned it previously in one of our conversations, but the idea of making sure that your computers and laptops and systems out there had video, had audio. Yep. Oh yeah, by the way, right?
Yep, we're still dealing with that. And not only so, the other thing too is in the case of virtual environments, they're taking that equipment generally with them, right? Mm-hmm. When they come to the physical site, they've got to be able to also plug in and play. Right. Yeah. Whether it's virtual via Wi-Fi or actually plug into a network. So that was something we hadn't dealt with either previously. So we're bringing that whole piece to be able to, anytime, anywhere. If they show up here, super, no questions asked. They put them to work, right? If they're at home, no questions asked. If they're on a beach in the Maldives, I don't care. As long as they're productive and able to meet on our work schedule here, where we're performing for our students and employees, that's how we accommodate now.
Well, I appreciate both your answers. And again, I'd love to hear from the audience, right? What's the expectation from real-time communications, right? Platform, always on, collaboration, interactive. Tell us about that. Give us your feedback. Look for that poll coming to you at a screen nearby. With that, I want to jump in again, Ricardo. I want to go back to you. Maybe explain a little bit for the audience that's listening or watching this. What is Synoptic's real-time communications offering? Is it just Teams? Tell us a little bit more about that, and maybe you can go from here.
Yeah, no problem, Eric. Actually, Synoptic plays a pretty unique role in the market. You've got a variety of providers that obviously have emerged to provide what's called Microsoft Teams direct routing. There's two ways that you can deploy Teams as a phone system. You can buy minutes directly from Microsoft. They're expensive. It's unmanaged. You don't get any help with the configuration of the tenant. Or you can go to a partner like us and you can purchase minutes through what they call direct routing, which is basically third-party calling plans. Where we're unique is that the UCaaS market has traditionally been reserved for the phone companies. You have 8x8, Ring Central, a variety of others. And the IT, the MSPs, the ITs, they've always kind of played more on the tenant side, but they're not phone people. They don't understand the nuances of telephony and PSTN and how to build a proper network to ensure QoS. And so you've got this real divide in the market between the people that can provide you the phone application, but they don't have the relationship with the end user. So in order to properly manage the phone system, you need access to the Microsoft 365 tenant. And so are you going to give access to 8x8 and Ring Central? You might, but most people probably aren't. On the other side, then you have the organizations that you do give access to your tenant, right? Your MSPs, but they don't understand phones. And so Synoptic is unique in this regard in the market because we cover both sides where we're a global company, 1,000 employees. We have all the security compliance accolades that you could want. And then, through our acquisition a few years back, we are now also a phone company. So we bring all of that deep carrier grade industry telephony expertise along with that trusted advisor relationship. And so there's basically three things that I would, succinctly say that stand us apart. Number one, we're a managed service provider. So the solution is going to be fully managed. If you have a problem with the solution, you're not going to open a ticket with Microsoft. It's going to be with us. You're going to leverage our expertise. We're going to configure all of the settings for you. We're going to help you think through the configuration. We're going to manage QoS. We're going to make sure that you get a managed world-class solution. The second thing is our voice network is traditional players. You think of like an 8x8 or RingCentral, they built their own application. And so for them to pivot you into Teams starts to cannibalize their investment and their solution. We're agnostic. We built a voice network that is solution agnostic. And so by way of that, we integrate directly and privately with a variety of manufacturers. So, Microsoft Teams for general telephony, Five9s for contact center, and a few others. And so we call that right application, right user. Let's configure and deploy the best application for that user in your environment. Because if you think about it, different departments have different needs. The accounting department has a different need than your support department, than your sales department, which might be integrating with CRM, and they need some integration there. So let's get right application, right user. Let's make sure you have the best-in-class solution for that department, and let's overlay it on our carrier-grade network. So the third piece is that carrier-grade network. We have a private path into these manufacturers, not over the public internet, and we're going to get you, 5 nines worth of uptime guarantee. And so I would say that's probably the three primary reasons that you would go with Synoptic.
Appreciate that.
No problem. So let's talk about right app, right user. So Teams is a phenomenal product, but there's some areas where Synoptic can augment that offering. The first one is user analytics. So we have the ability to plug and overlay some enhanced reporting functionality. It's going to give you the ability to do call recording, listen into calls, real-time queue analytics, enhanced reporting. We've launched our own SMS offering, so you'll be able to send and receive SMS messages directly from your Teams phone. And then Synoptic was the first, outside of Microsoft, the first provider to launch dynamic 911. So one of the novel aspects of Teams basically invented dynamic 911. It's the ability to automatically and dynamically change a user's civic address when they call 911. So imagine you're an organization with 10 buildings and a user is roaming within your environment. When they call 911, it will present the specific address and place to emergency services. And this is called dynamic location routing. And Microsoft came out with it, and we were the first organization to deploy it after Microsoft. The reason we know that is we have the same carrier as Microsoft, and that was something that we learned through them. And then, the majority of the functionality for call flows within Teams is going to serve for most companies out there, but you're going to get organizations that have more specific demands or higher demands when it comes to customer support or inbound call flows. They're going to need what we call omni-channel, and that's when we would integrate an environment with Teams and Five9s. Five9s is it's the world's best cloud contact center platform. We peer privately with them in their data centers. We integrate with Teams. You can do presence, you can transfer, and so that's kind of our I would say our best in class solution for an organization. And then you take that solution and you wrap around it, Synoptic's ability we're a Microsoft Gold partner. We have all of the compliance accolades that you would want. And you're going to get this world-class organization ensuring QoS, security, compliance, advancing the product. And then we have clients that have users spread out over the world. You're going to have potentially the need for global calling plans. So I have a user in Spain. I need a number for Madrid so they can place local calls. I think within about 40 countries, we can provide a full suite of PSTN, which would include like emergency services. And then it's about 100 where, maybe there's some variation of that, incoming only or toll, or incoming and outgoing and toll, but maybe not emergency services. And this graph kind of gives you a visual representation of the countries that we can provide PSTN for.
Appreciate that, Ricardo. So one of the things I kind of want to jump back to maybe Joe or Chuck, and you sort of answered this a little bit, but maybe take this opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into your situations, right? We know COVID happened and you had previous existing systems. Maybe you can talk a little bit, Joe, why don't we go to you first, about the challenges that really prompted you to make a move. What is going to be the challenge for somebody else to make that move? What was it for you?
Well, our biggest challenge is kind of making that leap. There was people that were, we used a lot of Skype for Business, and there was people that are very set in what they understand. So, what we liked about how we went about this is to make that leap, your users had to, feel comfortable that they were going to be taken care of. And so, and then 2, they got to be excited about what's coming. And, looking at teams, and kind of also selling to folks, because everybody had kind of seen how stale Skype had become. Look at the shiny new thing, look at how it's put together, look at what we can do inside of it by itself without having to know how to click on other stuff. And that really helped drive, how we had to move forward and how we had to go. Eric, does that help address your question? Oh, you're on mute, Eric. I'm sorry.
Do that. Of course, it had to happen to somebody. It had to happen to me.
Oh, that's right.
Chuck, same question for you, right? What was the major challenge? Was it COVID? Was there something else that just what you had before just wasn't going to get it done?
Yeah, no, I mean, COVID advances, but really where we were at was, again, I mentioned that legacy architecture before. We really had an infrastructure that was problematic in the support area at the very least. We could have just opted to upgrade that entire, on-prem sort of architecture. But there was really no thought along that path. It's like, let's move into the 21st century, both because of where we're doing, we're growing, we're looking, Joe's already made the move, we're looking at a new location some point down the road. We wanted to be sure we could address those kind of expansion and growth possibilities, but the infrastructure was very dated. We're on an old high school campus, to be real frank about it. So, and you can still see the copper panels in the walls if you walk into some of the closets. So that honestly was the driving force when we started thinking about telecom. Where do we take it? How do we decide to update it? So you're muted again.
Of course. Chuck, I wanted to follow on with that that question, really around kind of total cost of ownership that we received from the audience. Have you been able to kind of compare the cost of the legacy infrastructure or other systems and the efficiency or productivity support services with maybe the new platform and moving forward?
So we actually did a bunch of that on the front end, trying to evaluate the cost, and we didn't really go into it as a cost savings proposal. The net is we did save money, but when you look across the whole perspective, but the major piece was to set us up for the future. But so we didn't really go after the cost savings as an approach. Did have those savings. I think I think as you kind of look for that plan, and Kent, you may want to jump in here a little bit because I know you did all the research on that, but we were able to tie that all in now into an efficient system that was all aligned and brought together, as opposed to the piecemeal approach that was architected on the campus previously. So it presents a pretty good opportunity to streamline the whole piece. And the support side now, that could actually move into a standard support model, where we didn't necessarily have telecom expertise on the campus. Previously, we had people doing telecom, but never really owned that expertise. We now, through the managed services approach, have that ownership of support across both technology and telecom as a unified solution. So that's really been the big uplift for us on that support side, and an expansion of the service delivery where we're not locked to the campus location any longer.
I appreciate that.
I'm just going to piggyback. Because prior, we were Southern California University was paying for, the dial tone separately from the phone line, separately from the support for the Mitel ShoreTel system, separately from the upkeep of that system. It kind of folds everything under one umbrella. It deals with having one support line. It folds into the Microsoft licensing paradigm. So it just makes it easier overall to have everything go through one system. It makes the support easier, dealing with one entity to support it, and it folds everything into one place. So it definitely was a cost savings in terms of like overall from a net reduction, but also it's just a streamlined approach to just dealing with sort of one carrier, one billing system. It all goes through Microsoft.
And Joe, maybe you can add to that, or again, if you've got a different story, but any thoughts on total cost of ownership and making these changes?
Yeah, absolutely. It was part of our justification to do it. And so it was not just the Teams component. It was looking at the whole package of what we were paying for in licensing from Microsoft, and then discovering how many pieces it could displace. And then being able to present to our board that this investment to move to Teams, you have to change some things, would pay off in months, not years. All the way from how we use our devices and all of the software we're paying maintenance on that we can get rid of, simplification of user rollout. All of it had TCO that we could show.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. One of the other questions that's coming from the audience is, if you look at, again, maybe time to make a decision, and sometimes this is always hard, like when was a decision made, but to actually being finished. And Chuck, this might be a little more difficult for you, but Joe, I'll start with you. What was the duration? What was the time frame of beginning to end?
If you're talking from a decision point of view, it was like I think I've said a couple of times, we all watched and waited for Microsoft to retire. How are they going to retire? And so once we kind of got our act together with our total cost of ownership and working with the Synoptic team to understand how we used our phones and what we were going to have to do with the new system, we did a big bang. We're a smaller company. We're under 100 employees, but we made the change in one night, from an adoption and rollout and move perspective, which I think helped. Because of our size, we could do that, where we could affect everybody at once. And if there were no problems, but if we had to solve problems, we were going to solve them that night.
And Chuck, why don't I go to you real quick? Talk about your experience, transition, timing. What was that like?
Yeah, so I again, Kent may jump in to make sure I stay honest here, but yeah, so very similar. I mean, we basically, once we had the decision made, I think over a weekend, we flipped the switch and we did a big bang drop. That being said, we took, I'm going to say about 60 days, Kent. There was playing on phone trees. There were playing on some training that had to be done, some rollout pieces. So we tried to be as thoughtful as we could. And gain information out ahead of time and making sure we planned ahead of time. And we went back and forth several times on, the architecture of the actual system itself. But decision had been made. That was internal on us to plan and get comfortable. And then really once we picked a date, we just went for it. So I think same experience that Joe had and that whole managed services approach. You have to be ready though for day one when you do that some people, even though you've done the training and tried to do the prep, there's going to be those people who just didn't pick up. Right, who didn't follow through the emails, the communications, et cetera. So you've got to have the support team really on day one ready for those phone calls that are going to come and go, what happened to my phone? Right. So what happened to my communication model? How do I do X, Y, Z? And be prepared. That's going to carry over a few days, at least a few weeks in our case, I think. But and Kent, is there anything else you want to tie in on that?
Yeah, I think some of the challenges were that we looked at how things were configured in the old system and basically forklifted them over with the understanding that that's how they were used to working with them. That there was some very early feedback that was actually suboptimally configured. They were just used to it working that way, but they were able to give us that feedback and say, actually, we'd rather it work this way. We'd rather the auto attendant work this way and go to this phone tree before this phone tree. So, anytime you make a migration, it's like when you move house, right? It makes you get rid of your stuff and clean things out and come up with better systems. It was just like that. Through the process of migrating, it gave us a chance to sort of revisit some of those configurations and make some improvements. And I was going to make a point because it's a university, it's a public facility. We also have to have E911 capabilities, as Rico mentioned, the direct routing And also like emergency call boxes are on campus. So we had to get that configured and working as well. There has to be one in each classroom. There has to be multiple call booths so that people, if there's a security issue, they can reach out for some help. So we had some challenges there as well to make sure all that stuff was working, but we were able to do that effectively with the mix of systems, and that's all integrated into Teams. So even if you're a public facility that has those requirements, that can still work under the Teams platform and moving to the Microsoft paradigm.
I do see as part of the question out there too, Joe, I just want to add on, as far as other people being involved, we definitely spoke to other areas, but there were really only probably 2 or 3 people on the campus, myself being one of those, our facilities person and our tech, who Synoptic was already in place there, who were informing this. So it didn't require a whole brain trust of months and months and months of theory and philosophy to go on and figure this out. It was a pretty streamlined team, communicating, training, trying to address the culture issue, and then there on weekend, this day -1 and day 1, right? So it didn't require a whole host of planning effort or extensive amount of resource from the rest of the university.
I appreciate those answers. I think one question that, nobody's presented it, but it's made me think, Rico, maybe you can speak to this a little bit. We talked about the Big Bang approach, right? And the ability to do that. But I know some organizations are so large in size and have such legacy information that their ability to just cut over is really challenging. Can you speak at all to the ability to be in a hybrid situation with some of our technology and the ability to transition over time?
Yeah. So what we're seeing is, you look at this migration to the cloud, the larger entities are somewhat stuck because of this issue, right? They don't have the ability to do a Big Bang approach, and they don't want to disconnect the system, the unified communications. And so they find themselves, it's too difficult to coordinate such a large scale Big Bang. And if they don't do a Big Bang, then they disconnect the systems. And so they find themselves stuck and they're unable to migrate to the cloud. So what we do is we're able to drop a temporary device in the environment. It's called a session border controller. And then the session border controller does a variety of things. One of them is to translate. And so we'll be able to translate from the legacy PBX to Teams because they're on different signaling protocols. Teams doesn't use SIP. It uses TLS. It's fully encrypted. It's a lot skinnier and less problematic than SIP, but it's a different signaling protocol. So by dropping in this middleware, if you will, it's not, we're able to keep the organization being able to 4-digit dial and communicate internally, and then methodically start migrating over sites, either clusters of sites or individual sites, until they're until they're completely migrated, and then we'll jettison that device. And so we're able to do this methodical PBX to cloud migration. We've done that numerous times.
I appreciate that. That's a great answer again for some of those larger organizations that can't just do a one-night cutover, a weekend cutover. Rico, maybe you can, to follow on that, there's a question coming from the audience about CRM integration. Can you speak to that at all? And again, with Teams and Microsoft, but other integrations?
The Teams API is open. It's maybe not as open as people would like it to be, but through that API, it is possible to integrate with CRMs. We've done some work specifically with Dynamics and Salesforce, and we're looking at ServiceNow. But there's another product that we use. If you're an organization that's using Five9s, for example, they have integrations as well. It just depends on the organization, what systems you're using, what CRM you want. But the short answer is yes, it's possible.
And I think one of the things, again, with Synoptic is that because we have application integration team and other services, we're able to help integrate certain services. Maybe the technology is not there now, but we have been able to create some custom integrations for
and a lot of the CRMs, like you think of like Salesforce, it already has a plugin with Teams. There's a variety of things. Teams has emerged as such a powerhouse and such a force that everybody's rushing to accommodate and integrate with Teams.
Well, listen, again, I really appreciate everybody's time. I want to shortly wrap up here. As you guys have looked, and maybe I'll ask this question to Joe and Chuck individually, but if you think about your partnership with Synoptic and the transition that you've had to go through, can you speak to that a little bit, and or anything that you think you could have done better or we could have done better to just make people mindful of that? Because we always want to improve in all situations. And Joe, why don't we start with you just, again, the partnership, how it's helped, but other things that we could also look at for customers.
Yeah, right. You know, what really helped us was having a partner who understood our business and how we use the devices. You know, to do that work up front and not just insist that this is the system, this is the way you should do it, really helped us out. It allowed us then to focus on the things within Teams and Voice there that were meaningful to us. And because there are features in there that honestly we don't use, that aren't meaningful to us. So, you know, why get distracted by those kind of rabbit holes? So having that focused attention and taking the time to know how we use our system, I think that's how we yielded the 24-hour cutover, and how we were successful at it.
Appreciate that. And Chuck, same question to you. Again, the partnership, things that you would want to do maybe moving forward, but also just how was that in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, for us, that was a little bit of a piece of the magic as well. I think, frankly, we could never hope to build the depth and breadth of expertise that Synoptic brought to the table on this process. So having that partner that, I'm going to echo some of what Joe said, who actually looked into us, understood what we were doing, helped us design appropriately as best we could, and trying to get people to think about how they want to do business, was something that would have taken us several more weeks or months of time and planning to get done. So we were able to move it very efficiently and think about things that I probably myself wouldn't have thought about, frankly, going through the process. So there's just a huge intrinsic value to bringing someone who understands the telecom industry generally and takes the time to understand who you are and then move together as a partner in a managed approach. So absolutely, I would strongly recommend that.
Well, appreciate the answers. And again, for anybody else out there that's listening, I wanted to open this up for Q&A. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Again, we'd love to be able to give you some live responses for some of the individuals on this phone, whether it's for any of our panelists or experts. Feel free to ask them now in the chat box or question. And we'll just give it a couple minutes here to see if anybody has any questions, and otherwise we'll wrap things up. Let's just give everybody a few seconds. All right, I think we got one here. Rico, maybe you could answer this specifically. Actually, maybe some of the other guests can answer this as well. But think about the statistics of real-time communications. Number one, Rico, can you talk specifically about even some of the add-ons and the things that we've done with being able to provide stats and detailed information around real-time communications? And
sure. Teams provides information natively, right? You're going to get, so the intention of Teams is to give you analytics on productivity. And so the question is, what marks productivity? Is it phone calls? Is it meetings? Is it screen sharing? Is it setting appointments? This data, by way of using Teams, you're collecting this data on all of the staff, and then you can collect this data, through a range of time, through a group of people, an individual person. All of the data that Teams is collecting is accessible through Power BI. That's kind of their elaborate reporting solution within their ecosystem. But there are some problems with this approach natively within Teams. You have to be granted access to the admin center, and you can't schedule reports. Now within Power BI you can, but I'm just saying, like, within Teams itself. So while the data is there, and they're going to give you, data that Teams finds to be the most maybe important, you can't schedule it, and whoever can access it has to be ad hoc, and they have to have access. So that's not optimal. So I'm in a couple of slides before, I mentioned that we overlay enhanced analytics, and so it's this it's this tool that allows you to grant access to users in the environment that don't need administrative access into the tenant. And then they're going to be able to access a trove of variables within the tenant on demand, build really polished high-end reports. And so productivity is going to mean different things for different people and for different organizations. Like, for example, Teams will give you how many chats somebody did or channel messages. That to me doesn't resonate. I don't find that as a meaningful metric, but there's organizations where that is meaningful. So, it's what you want the ability to access the data, produce reports easily, elegantly, schedule the reports, And so that tool that I mentioned that we have can help you do that.
And I know Chuck and Joe alluded to this a little bit before with working with Synoptic, but can you just tell us about the onboarding and training that's provided by Synoptic through this process? How much work is needed there? What does that look like generally for a company going through this?
Eric, is that question to me?
Yeah, Ricardo, if you could answer that.
Oh, yeah, no problem. It depends on where you are in your journey with Teams. I would say, a lot of the clients that I see are already on Teams to some degree. So if you're using Teams today, and everybody's journey kind of starts at the same place, right? Because Teams can do a lot. Everybody pretty much can pick up instant messaging. Chat seems like an easy one that's easy to deploy and start using, right? That's the easiest one. And maybe the hardest one is when you get into like the teams and the channels and some of the file sharing stuff. So depending where you are in your journey, the training is going to basically react to that. If you're already using Teams today and you're calling each other internally, Teams to Teams for free, and you're video sharing, the ability to now, instead of calling somebody internally, also call their cell phone, that's not a big leap. And so the training becomes really more about, these are the features that are available, and now let me help you configure Teams for you, because Teams is highly configurable. So a lot of what deploying Teams is not learning how to use Teams. It's learning how to configure Teams for your particular style and preference and needs because of your personality or your position in your department. And so it's more of a creating this bespoke experience in helping users identify that. So what we like to do is, I usually identify the receptionist or executive admins up front. These are the users that are going to bear the brunt of the cutover. They're the ones that answer the majority of the calls. They're the ones going to be the most anxious. We cater to them individually and give them more attention so that when the cutover happens, if you want anybody to be comfortable, it's that user base. Everybody else is usually about an hour training. We offer a morning session, a PM session, usually the day or the day before of the cutover. We give them a quick guide. We give them a pre-recorded version of the meeting. They get the recorded version of that meeting, and we walk them through all the team settings. It's incredibly user-friendly. It's a single pane of glass experience. Everything they need to know is on one screen. And then what I like to do is I like to do a follow-up, maybe about 10 days after going live. I've started doing this live Q&A. There's no agenda. It's optional. People show up and they get to ask questions. So it's really more of like, hey, I showed you how to use Teams. You've been using Teams for a couple of days now. Tell me where you would like it to be better for you. You know what? Every time I do this, it does that. I'd like it to do something else. And so we talk about it as a community, and people learn from each other, and think of it as like like pro tips or Teams hacks. And usually that's our typical cadence. Now, if you're deploying Microsoft Teams for the first time and no one's ever used it, the training schedule is going to be probably a little bit more advanced than that. But generally speaking, that's the agenda.
Thanks. I got one more question for you, Ricardo. Hopefully this is a short one. Can you just talk about the solution pricing? How does Synoptic price it? What's the model?
There's two models. There's price per user like Microsoft. So the difference is Microsoft is going to be a fixed plan. It's $12 for domestic minutes. It's $24 for domestic international. You're going to get 3,000 minutes. Ours is going to be usually less than that. It goes down based on your number of size. You get a price break. And it's going to be unlimited minutes North America. So that's the per user unlimited model. There's also for companies that are maybe larger and would rather buy based on usage. Then we have a platform program where you subscribe to the platform and then you buy minutes based on actual consumption, and it's not unlimited. In a nutshell, those are the two programs.
Well, with that'll be our last question. Again, I wanted to thank everybody for this hopefully informative webinar. Joe, Chuck, thank you honestly for being our guests today. Kent, Stefan, Ricardo, appreciate it. And for everybody out there, have a great day. Hope you've enjoyed the webinar.
Thank you. Take care.